Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us on our case study presentation of Apple. My name is Gavin and joining me today is Rebecca, Samantha, Debbie, and Yin. So I'll start by giving a brief history of Apple. So in 1976, Apple was founded by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. In 1984, the Mac operating system was released. 1985, not a whole lot of people know this one, but Steve Jobs was actually fired from Apple. Then the company started to kind of tank a little bit. So in 1996, they brought Steve Jobs back, and in 2001, the iPod, iTunes, like Apple started gaining traction. 2007, iPhone got released. And then 2001, there was actually a change in leadership, and Tim Cook took over as CEO. So one of the first things that we had to do was to conduct an internal and external environmental analysis using the SWOT matrix. We won't have time to get into all the stuff that we found for the SWOT matrix, but let's start with strengths first. So one of the strengths that we said for Apple was they have a big, interconnected, easy-to-use product ecosystem. The iPhone, iPod, iPad, AirPods, all that stuff works together pretty well and easy. So this almost creates a psychological switching cost for consumers. That's why you don't have like a Samsung phone and you're using AirPods. Easy to use, or not easy to use. So as a result, that kind of creates like a devout cult-like consumer base. Another strength that Apple carries is they're an innovative product leader with things, like iCloud, CarPlay, the Apple Wallet. They almost set like a gold standard for the industry. So another strength is kind of like partnerships that Apple carries with brands like Nike, IBM, Beats by Dre. Another strength is Apple has, clever and catchy advertising. Some people probably remember the "Hi, I'm a Mac, hi, I'm a PC" commercials from the early 2000s. Moving on to some of the internal weaknesses. This one is called the law of big numbers, and it's expected soon, and I say that with an asterisk. I'll come back to that. What the law of large numbers is basically is, let's assume you flip a coin, first 5 times, maybe heads. But if you do that for 1,000 times, flipping heads, it starts to come to the expected value of about 50-50. In the Apple case, how that relates to Apple is their growth patterns. So Apple keeps releasing new, revolutionary, innovative products like the iPod, iPhone. But if they don't keep doing that, there's a possibility they might start to plateau. And that's where Tim Cook disagrees. So as a result, maybe we can expect things like the iCar here in a couple years. I don't know. Another weakness that we said Apple carries, this one's pretty self-explanatory. They have a dependence on the high-end, like A-level customer base. Apple stuff is expensive. Another weakness is that their products are kind of difficult to use on other operating systems. I don't know if you've ever tried to use a Apple product on a PC, like iTunes, the App Store, your iPhone. It's just an extra layer that you have to go through. So moving on to some of the external opportunities is the Southeast Asian and South American markets are actually kind of consumer markets are expanding. So there's more people to sell product to. Another opportunity is the growing communication infrastructure, things like 5G towers. Maybe that means there's new modes of operations or new markets to market to. Maybe Apple starts getting into business-to-business transaction stuff or partnerships. Speaking of partnerships, that's another thing they could do is start doing some mergers, acquisitions. The big one that's being rumored right now is possibly an Apple and Tesla merger or acquisition. Um, Moving on to some of the external threats, is there's large, diverse competitors trying to gain market share within the industry, and there's no like Apple doesn't dominate every industry. If you're looking at like the PC industry or the smartphone industry or the tablet industry or smartwatch, like Apple has a good chunk of it, but there's a lot of other competition going for it. Another threat, and this one is a little sensitive, is governments trying to exert control and influence over the technology industry in general. We saw this in America with like the San Bernardino shooters. The U.S. government was asking Apple to basically create a backdoor software that would give the U.S. government basically a master key to anyone's iPhone, and Apple said no. And then in the China example, the recent Hong Kong protests that are going on, the Chinese government came to Apple and asked if these certain apps could be deleted. These apps were letting protesters, coordinate, plan, and organize doing some of those protests. In this case, Apple did concede to the Chinese government requests, so we'll see what kind of precedent this sets out. Another couple threats is, large counterfeit market with knockoff products. I wouldn't call this one a threat per se, but Apple does need to be conscientious of the rising labor costs outside of the U.S. Because other countries are starting to come out of poverty. It's a good thing for them, but it's an expense for Apple's supply chains that they need to take into account. All right, so that concludes our SWOT analysis. We didn't talk about every single thing that was on there. And now I'm going to hand it off to Yin, and she's going to talk about the VRIO analysis for two of Apple's products.
For the second question, the two different segments I choose are iPhone and AirPods, and we use the VRIO model to analyze the competitive advantage of Apple company. As we are learning in this class, the VRIO model is a strategic analysis framework applied during the internal analysis of strategic planning. The model is based on the evaluation of resources and capabilities. So it has four parts, which are value, rarity, imitability, and organization. For the first one, iPhone, in terms of value, iPhone's resources are all valuable except for their inability to support certain web interfaces. Also, the iPhone requires iTunes to be installed on a PC in order to synchronize data if the user does not use iCloud. These compatibility issues can put Apple at a competitive disadvantage. iPhone is thinner and lighter than most handphones, so it is easier to use and control, and it has powerful functionality. iPhone has a matching iOS system which can meet almost all the needs of people. It has a smart voice assistant Siri that can perform simple instructions such as calling restaurants, setting alarms, and asking about the weather. Although the price of the iPhone is a little bit higher than other smartphones of the same type, it is worth it. For rarity, although it is not the first smartphone or touching screen phone in the world, Apple has played a very important role in the development of smartphone industry. We cannot find too many other operation systems that can be compared with iOS. And in addition to Siri, the iPhone has many special features too, like iMessage and FaceTime. This was unprecedented when the iPhone was first released. In terms of imitability, as what we mentioned before, except for the Android system, we cannot find any other operating systems can be compared with iOS. Similarly, Apple's brand name is difficult to imitate too. However, other companies have a strong ability to learn and imitate. For those companies, it is more effective to imitate Apple's innovations and launch their own products. Soon after Apple developed these features in their products, other companies begin to imitate them, such as a voice assistant, fingerprint identification, and Face ID. Both brand name and iOS software give Apple a sustainable competitive advantage, but other resources like ease of use and Siri, they can only give Apple a temporary advantage. For AirPods, it is very similar too. Its brand name Apple, like a sunboard, give it a sustainable competitive advantage. In terms of value and rarity, its appearance design make it extremely comfortable and not easy to fall off. It has many valuable features that have never been designed before. For example, people can play and pause music and videos by touching it. People can pause music and videos automatically when taking off the earphone. At the same time, the function of calling Siri provided by AirPods enable people to control the mobile phone more conveniently. Even a pair of AirPods can be linked to two devices at the same time. The AirPods for a fast charging feature allow it to run for about 3 hours after 15 minutes of charging, but this is not unique to AirPods, so it does not have rarity. In terms of battery performance, AirPods is only competitive partly. In terms of imitability, AirPods are not very difficult to imitate. In recent years, other mobile phone and technology companies have launched similar products. So no matter from the appearance, design, and the function design, AirPods only have a temporary competitive advantage. Here's the data of market share since the launch of AirPods. We found after the launch of AirPods, it quickly occupied a large market share, which is about 26%. It will monopolize the market in the short run, but actually, due to other companies' imitation and entering the market share would decrease and the competitive advantage would also decrease. By comparing the two different segments above, we found that most of Apple's products are similar in terms of competitive advantage. However, Apple's strong innovation capabilities and high brand loyalty among Apple users still allow Apple to occupy a large market share in this industry.
Hi, I'm Debbie. So after review the VIO analysis of Apple, we wonder how about the VIO for the competitors of Apple? Why it is challenging, how good it is to be Apple's top competitor. So Samsung, the company we would like to talk about. Samsung is a leading electronic brand in the smartphone and tablet market. As a top competitors of Apple, Samsung focused a lot of innovations to bring efficient products that are excellent in performance and productivity. The result has been growth in popularity and sales. Some of its cost range including advanced technology,